My wife stood in the middle of our living room with her arms folded, looking straight into my eyes as if she had rehearsed the speech 100 times. Without hesitation, she said, "You'll just have to accept that I'm dating someone else." The room suddenly felt smaller, quieter, almost frozen in time. Every memory we had built together flashed through my mind, yet my face remained calm. Instead of arguing, begging, or shouting, I simply smiled and answered, "Okay." She looked confused for a split second, grabbed her purse, slammed the front door behind her, and disappeared into the night, completely unaware that those 2 letters had just sealed the end of every lie she had ever told. The silence after she left was almost comforting. Most people imagine betrayal ends with screaming matches or broken furniture, but mine began with absolute stillness. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stared out the window while replaying the past 6 months in my head. The late-night business meetings, the secretive phone calls, the sudden obsession with looking perfect before leaving the house. It all finally made sense. What she believed was confidence was actually carelessness. She thought confessing would make me powerless. But she didn't realize I had quietly been preparing for this moment longer than she could imagine. 3 months earlier, tiny details had started bothering me. She had changed her phone password after years of leaving it unlocked on the coffee table. She suddenly insisted on doing all the laundry herself and began deleting our shared calendar appointments. Whenever I asked simple questions, her answers sounded rehearsed instead of natural. My instincts told me something wasn't right, but instincts alone don't survive in court or convince family members. I needed facts, not feelings. So instead of accusing her, I became patient. I observed everything without saying a word, knowing that truth usually exposes itself to those willing to wait. One evening, while organizing paperwork for our taxes, I noticed a credit card statement she had forgotten to shred. Several expensive hotel charges appeared during weekends. She claimed to be attending work conferences. Curious, I compared those dates with her office schedule posted on the company's public employee portal. She hadn't worked any of those weekends. That discovery changed everything. Rather than confronting her immediately, I started documenting every inconsistency. Receipts, messages she accidentally left visible on our tablet, rideshare histories, and financial transfers slowly formed a timeline so complete that every missing piece of the puzzle began fitting together with frightening precision. The biggest surprise arrived from someone I never expected, her co-worker, Melissa. She contacted me through social media with a simple message: "You deserve to know the truth." At first, I assumed it was a cruel prank, but after we met at a quiet cafe, she placed several printed emails on the table. Melissa explained she had grown tired of covering for my wife, who constantly lied about fake meetings while spending time with another man. She apologized for staying silent for so long and admitted she couldn't watch an innocent person continue living inside a carefully manufactured illusion. Her honesty gave me exactly what I had been missing: independent confirmation. Instead of exploding with anger, I hired an experienced attorney and a forensic accountant. Together, we reviewed every financial record connected to our marriage. What began as an investigation into infidelity uncovered something even more shocking. Large sums of money had quietly disappeared from our joint savings over the previous year. Hidden transfers, unauthorized withdrawals, and purchases disguised as household expenses painted a picture far worse than betrayal alone. Every document was copied, time-stamped, and legally preserved. By the time my wife proudly announced she was dating someone else, nearly every important piece of evidence had already been secured beyond her reach. That was why my smile had unsettled her. She expected tears, arguments, or desperate promises to win her back. Instead, while she celebrated what she believed was her freedom, I spent the next morning finalizing legal paperwork that would expose every deception she had built her new life upon. My attorney filed a divorce petition, froze our remaining joint assets where legally appropriate, and submitted evidence supporting financial misconduct. Then we quietly notified the bank and documented every transaction one final time. My wife believed she had walked away victorious, but the first domino had only just begun to fall. The weeks that followed were nothing like my wife had imagined. She expected angry phone calls, emotional confrontations, or desperate attempts to win her back. Instead, Every conversation went through my attorney, and every decision was based on facts rather than feelings. Friends and relatives who had only heard her version of the story slowly began asking questions after noticing inconsistencies in her explanations. I never tried to turn anyone against her. I simply refused to defend myself with gossip. The truth has a strange way of finding daylight when people stop talking and start paying attention to evidence. The most important day arrived during the divorce mediation. Sitting across the conference table, she looked as confident as ever, convinced that I had nothing substantial to support my claims. My attorney calmly opened a folder filled with financial records, timelines, and supporting documents. One by one, each record was reviewed. Unexplained withdrawals from our joint account, payments that had been disguised as business expenses, and contradictory statements about shared finances all came into focus. The room grew noticeably quieter with every page that was presented. And for the first time since this ordeal began, confidence slowly disappeared from her face. When the mediator requested explanations for several financial discrepancies, her answers became hesitant. Dates didn't match. Receipts contradicted earlier statements. Documents she had assumed were long forgotten had been legally preserved months before. Nobody raised their voice and nobody celebrated. The facts spoke of themselves. What had started as an emotional breakup became a lesson in accountability. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about closing a painful chapter honestly, with the evidence leading every decision rather than resentment or speculation. Outside the courtroom, my own life quietly began changing for the better. I accepted promotion at work that I had postponed for years, started spending weekends with my parent again, and even returned to photography, a hobby I had abandoned during the marriage. For the first time in a long while, my days weren't filled with anxiety over someone else's choices. Healing wasn't dramatic. It happened through ordinary mornings, peaceful evenings, and the realization that my future no longer depended on fixing a relationship that had already fallen apart. Several months after the divorce was finalized, I unexpectedly ran into Melissa at a neighborhood cafe. She smiled and asked how I was doing. I thanked her for having the courage to tell the truth when it mattered most. But I also admitted that the greatest lesson hadn't come from discovering someone else's mistakes. It came from learning that dignity is often found in restraint. We spoke for a few minutes, wished each other well, and walked away in different directions. Some people enter your life to stay, while others appear only long enough to help you find your way forward. Sometimes I think back to that evening when my wife looked directly into my eyes and said, "You'll just have to accept that I'm dating someone else." At the time, those words felt like the end of everything I had built. Now I understand they were actually the beginning of a different life, one built on honesty, self-respect, and peace instead of uncertainty. My quiet smile that night wasn't a sign that I had stopped caring. It was the moment I decided I would no longer let someone else's decisions define who I was. Looking back, I don't remember the arguments that never happened or the revenge I never sought. I remember the calm that followed once I chose integrity over anger. Lies can create temporary victories, but they rarely survive careful examination and the passage of time. The life I rebuilt wasn't perfect, yet was authentic, and that mattered more than anything I had lost. In the end, the greatest victory wasn't proving someone else wrong. It was proving to myself that even after betrayal, a person can choose character over bitterness and walk confidently toward a better future.